Hello everyone, a pleasant day. So we'll be continuing our discussion on the mechanisms and processes of evolution. So for this part, we are now going to talk about natural selection. So we have finished the first three probable drivers of evolution. So we have finished genetic drift, the rest of the topics on mutation, and of course our so we have genetic drift, mutation, I forgot the other one. Anyway, we have finished that topic and now we'll be continuing on natural selection. So natural selection, again, okay, here's the topic. So finished mutation, migration, and gene flow, okay, and we have finished genetic drift. Now we'll be talking about natural selection and probably the modern evolutionary synthesis. However, I might give that modern evolutionary synthesis to you as part of your reading. Okay. So, in natural selection, you have to comply, or at least there are four things that you have to remember when we are going to talk about natural selection. So here we have variation. Number two is competition. Number three is adaptations. And of course, the last is selection. For natural selection to occur, this four should be seen, or at least their effects could be seen in the population. We know for a fact that when we're talking about variation, this is a genetic variation within a population which can be inherited. So variation is part and parcel being affected by also mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift. That's part of it also. So here, we'll talk about variation in a little short things only because you are already familiar with the things that could happen if mutation occurs. So we have there the point, and then the frame shift that we have talked about. We have on the genetics on the different levels of variation or mutation that we have talked about last time. So we will now be focusing most of the discussion on competition because overproduction of offspring could lead to competition of survival. So pag-uusapan natin, we'll be talking about on the certain things on competition. Competition, hindi computation. Okay. The third one is adaptation. Of course, your organism has different adaptive capabilities, and if we can still remember on our first video discussion or on our first meeting discussion, we have talked about that adaptation could lead to either phenotypic plasticity on your organisms, or it could really affect the evolution per se because of the mutation when that adapted function, behavior, or physiological characteristics become embedded on the genetic makeup of your organisms. And of course, last is selection. In terms of selection, we'll talk about here several things that could affect the natural selection process of your population, which inherently will affect or drive organisms or a specific population of organisms to what do you call this, to change and evolve. So focus tayo ngayon on natural selection. We talk about mutation already. The gene flow, that is when your organisms migrate, they carry the genes from one place to another. We have genetic drift, we have the bottleneck, and of course your the other one, which is the founder effect. Example is on the Amish people. So now we'll be focusing on this four parts for selection. Again, when we're talking about natural selection, the emphasis in here is that your organisms adapt. And because they adapt, that could lead to change on your organisms. That change could be the phenotypic plasticity that we have talked about on the misconceptions, or because of the prolonged exposure to a certain stimuli or stimulus in the environment, the characteristics become now embedded on the genetic makeup of your organism. So here, in natural selection, organisms adapt, they change, it could be changed, that could be embedded entirely to their gene makeup. when this becomes now embedded to their gene makeup, that this could be now inherited by the successive what do you call this, generation of organisms, no? Technically, there are things that it could be on the genes but not yet um, emphasized or not yet phenotypically expressed on the organism until the fourth generation. But if you will now be looking at the change that happens on the genotype or the gene of your organism, pwede mo nang matrace na, okay, on the last fourth generation, doon nag-start yung change. You can also be, that could happen, that the genotype or the change in the gene happens 3-4 generations ago before it can be expressed physically or phenotypically by your organism. That happens in the world of organism. Okay? So, the key term in here is that natural selection drives your evolution. It is highly because of the selection mechanism that happened naturally on our population. So let's talk about natural selection, and the first one condition that needs to happen for natural selection to occur is, of course, variation. Okay. Organisms inherit characteristics from both of their parents, and each person gets, or each organism gets, a different combination of features, which is known as inherited variation. You know this basically on your simple genetics heredity class that could have happened in your senior high school and could have happened on your general zoo and general botany discussion. But one thing is for sure, if this is a sexual reproduction, meaning there are two parents involved, there is a high chance that the genes of the parents could recombinate, no? There could be recombination that will happen, and because of that recombination, there could be inherited variation that will also occur. Remember on your meiosis 1, on the prophase 1, wherein you have there the 5 areas, no? I hope you can still remember your leptotene, zygotene, pachytene, no? And then you have your diakinesis and your terminalization. There is a crossover that happened wherein there's an exchange of the gene between your chromosomes, and because of that, there could be inherited variation that could also happen. So variation is needed, a condition that should be accomplished for natural selection to occur. Now, there are environmental variations also that we're going to talk about. Environmental variation are changes in characteristics of organisms as affected by their surrounding. So this is what I'm talking about earlier, that sometimes because of a certain change in the environment, that change could suddenly wipe out most of the population, but those remaining and surviving could have a characteristic that would enable them to thrive in the new environment, and that characteristic will now be enhanced or passed on successive generations. So there could be things like this. So variation could be inherited, no, from parents to offspring, and there could be also a variation that could happen to the individual population or organisms themselves because of the exposure to the environment condition. There are things like this to consider with variation. So inherited and of course your surrounding environment. You cannot go away with just saying, oh, variation happens only because of us, intrapersonal or innate to your to organisms. You have to understand that we still respond to stimulus in the environment, and thereby the environment could also stimulate some changes in your organism. Of course, hindi naman siya yung pa. Okay. Mainit ngayon. Ching, magkakaroon ka ngayon. Mawawalan ka ng buhok. Mamaya, okay, malamig ngayon. Dadami buhok mo like abruptly like that, no? That does not happen abruptly. Although, it needs to have generation. Okay. When we're talking about in genetics na, it's fast evolution. We're talking about several generations only. Like, 3, 4 generations, that's a fast evolution. But technically, 3 to 4 generations is how many years already? But in the light of evolution talk, that's a very short time period. When you talk about evolution as millions to billions of years, right? Now, I want you to do this activity. Please send this. Please send your answer. Or you can also write on your notebook there. You have your evolutionary notebook. Please write your answer and then attach the screenshot when you send it to the GC. This now will become your quiz, no? A check-up diagnostic test for you. So, for those who don't answer this and those who do not watch this video, mahuhuli ko talaga kayo. Okay, so here, what type of characteristics are listed below? So, kindly categorized freckles, eye color, natural hair color, blood group, genetic diseases, body weight, accent, and hair length, whether it's an environmental variation or an inherited variation. Okay, so let's take a look. So you can pause this and answer. Please send the screenshot, write that on your notebook so that when you submit your notebook, I could also get the feedback from there. Okay? Alright. Now, question on inherited variation. Is inherited variation applicable to twins? You know for a fact that we have two types of twins. We have the fraternal twins, yung katulad ng filials or progeny, progeny talaga, no? Yung progeny ni Aga Mulak and ni Charlene Gonzalez or ni Carmina Villaroel at ni Zorin Legaspi, Mavi and Cassie. Ano bang pangalan ng anak nung isa? Si A tsaka si A. These are good examples of fraternal twins, no? Fraternal twins kasi, they develop from two sets of egg and sperm. Sometimes the fraternal twins could be same gender or same sex or could be different. It could be a boy or a girl. But one thing is for sure, when we talk about fraternal twins, there's two eggs and that two eggs are fertilized by two sperms. Okay? When you say identical twins naman, here, ito yung physically, phenotypically, you cannot discern who is who. Sino bang artista ang twins? Oh, we have the Olsen twins, no? Ano nga bang pangalan ng dalawang Olsen na yun? Si Catherine at si, hindi ko nakilala yung kakambal niya. Or we have a local version, George and Jai of PBB, no? They are identical twins. Now, alam ko, identical sila kasi magkamukha, no? But, you can check, no, sa kanilang history. But then again, let's look at in that way. When you say identical twins, this is where they develop from one sperm and one egg, which were now fertilized. And along the way, on the process of your developmental biology, no, on the blasturation, gastrulation, and the process of that, along that way, this fertilized egg split off into two fertilized eggs, which now becomes two embryos and develop into two progeny. Now, question in here, sabi natin, kapag inherited variation, it is a recombination of the genes of the parents. Now, which among here is inherited variation applicable to twins? No, kasi sabi nila, one of the great things kapag nagkaroon ka ng sakit and you need to have organ transfer or you need to have an organ donor, you can get that from your twin brother or twin sister. But the question is there inherited variation among twins? The answer is yes. Even though they are 99.9%, genetically the same, that 0.01% could be an inherited variation. This is true pala, no, mga anak. There are times na ang kanyang donor ay ang kanyang twin sister or twin brother, pero pagdating sa katawan, nire-reject yan ng katawan ng katwin nila. It happens. So, in this two ngayon, my question is, between fraternal twins and identical twins, which do you think has inherited variation? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Here, okay, in inherited variation, okay, it is not applicable to your identical twins. That is, kung may fraternal ka, may identical ka, no? Why? Because they came from one fertilized egg and then they separate into two embryos, developing embryos. Technically, they do not have most of the inherited variation. Meron tayong inherited variation sa fraternal twins. Why? Because it came from two separate sperm and egg cell. So, dalawa-dalawa yun. Ma'am, pareho naman galing sa mama at papa yung sa may fraternal twin. That's true. But do remember, in your meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, which leads to the formation of your gametes. Ito yung layman's term natin, or the term that we have is oogenesis and spermatogenesis, no? With these two, you know for a fact that when we talk about in meiosis 1, there's recombination. Probably the oocyte or the egg formed could have different recombination recombination process that happened during their meiosis 1, giving a different varied type of genes carried by your egg cells. Yung oocytes mo kasi, though sa isang katawan lang siya, they could undergo several recombination processes during the oogenesis and the spermatogenesis process. And therefore, each of this could have different percentage kung gaano kadami yung gene na dala niya in terms of ano yung mas favorable. Dominant bang kinikarry niya, recessive bang kinikarry niya, will also differ. So, in terms of these two, sa twins na to, it's the fraternal twins that could have inherited variation. Or kahit twins sila, they are varied from each other. As you can see na, no, kung fraternal like Mavi and Cassie, or ano nga ba kasing pangalan ng A na yun? Si Anastasia ba yun? Anastasia or basta yung anak nila Aga. You can already see the manifestation of difference or variation in there kasi lalaki and babae, they carry a different karyotype, no? May XX and XY. So, there, variation na agad siya. Problem is on the identical twins. Now, may mga instances, no? There are some instances na sinasabi, ma'am, hindi, pwede rin magkaroon ng variation ang identical twins. As what I'm saying, they could be 99.9% the same, and it could make up around 0.01% na parang may variation. Pero that's too negligible to say na varied sila. Though, technically, theoretically speaking, identical twins should be, hindi siya ganun kalaki ang variation nila compared to your fraternal twins. Okay? So, that's the variation. Now, people have different variation. Kahit nga sa pamilya nyo, no? Kung titingnan mo yung mga kapatid mo, or kung wala kang kapatid, katulad ko, obserbahan mo yung isang pamilya na merong magkakapatid. You can see na magkakamukha. Technically, alam mo, magkakapatid sila kasi magkakamukha sila. But then again, bakit hindi sila 100% one carbon copy? As in, lahat talaga ganun ang mukha. It's because there is variation that happened. That though they came from one mother and one father, hopefully, pag faithful ang dalawa, charot. No? Though they came from those parents, there's still variation that happened on the oogenesis and spermatogenesis, leading to a variation on your organism. Okay? Now, the next that we have for natural selection to occur is competition. Now, competition is a product of overpopulation. You have to include the understanding in ecology in here. competition between or even within the population and other population. No? We have the intra-oscillations. Meron tayong tinatawag na intra-population oscillations and interpopulation oscillations. Meaning, ano pinagsasabi ko, nasa mundo ka, anong planeta ka na naman, mambakani. Okay, when you say there is an intra-population oscillations within one population, within the same population, there could be oscillations or fluctuations on the number of offspring. Yung sinabi mong interpopulation oscillations, you have 2 or 3 or 4 populations that are competing with each other, causing them for an increase or decrease in the population. Now, sabihin natin na isang populasyon lang yan. O sige, isang populasyon lang muna tayo ng paru-paro. O yan, ng green na yan. Okay? Now, competition happens when there is overproduction. Marami na yung anak, marami yung offspring, pero yung kakayanan ng environment to support this organism is not paralleling or hindi siya nakakaantabay. It cannot give the needs of this number of population. So, meron kasi tayong tinatawag in the ecology, we call it as carrying capacity of the environment. When you say carrying capacity, this is the capacity of the environment to provide for the needs of every organism present in the area. Now, there is only a certain carrying capacity for each niche or for each habitat. Now, if organisms overpopulate, okay, it overpopulates, and it doesn't. What happens now is that the increase in the number of the organism will not be able to suffice by the carrying capacity of the environment, and therefore, because of that, species now will have struggles. They will now struggle for survival. Why? Because the environment nga could not. No, ayan, meron ng struggle for survival because the environment could not keep up, no, on the needs of these organisms simply because of limiting resources. And limiting resource now could negatively affect the population growth rates, no? It could affect that. And if it does affect the population growth rates, if there's overpopulation, there could now be intense competition between organisms over scarcity of food, scarcity of habitat, scarcity of place to live. So, ang nangyayari ngayon, they tend to fight for each other. Okay, what happens is that it could lead for one organism to kill to another organism. So, kasi nga, limited na yung resources mo or limited na yung makukuha mo. You can see this, no, even in humans, di ba? To the point na nag-away sa lupa. Yung kakarampot na lupa, it's a limited resource. Lupa, no? Nagpatayan yung mag-ama o nagpatayan yung mga family members over a very small amount of land. So you can see that it happens even in the natural setting. You can see lions versus lions. You can see other competing organisms. They compete to each other because of limited resource, to the point that sometimes it causes if during fight it causes death to the other, or the organism could die because of pagkagutom, ganyan, or pagkauhaw, and so on. So here, competition also causes or affect natural selection. So here, we have what you call as character displacement. This is an evolutionary effect of competition. When you say character displacement, because of limited ang resource, so kung baga, i-drawing na, ito yung isa, population A, at tapos meron tayong population B. They have the same sources, or pareho sila ng kailangan or pareho sila ng pinagkakainan, lahat na pareho sa kanila. So, since they have the same requirements to live, kaya ang nangyayari in here, but the environment is so limiting, since same sila ng kailangan, magko-compete. There's a very intense pressure, intense lahat ng palagi, kasi palagi silang mag-aaway for that, to the point of what we call as exhaustion or pagkapagod. Technically, it happens, no? Yung pagkapagod, hindi yung katulad ng iniisip nyo, okay, rest ako, tapos away tayo ulit, mga ganyan. Parang sa love life nyo lang, di ba? Napagod. Sobrang intense ang pagmamahalan nyo, nag-aaway na kayo palagi, so much pressure. Okay, kung ganito lang naman ang mangyayari sa atin, mag-split na lang tayo para hindi na toxic. Sabayan mo ng kantang All My Life is Toxic, yeah, mga ganyan. Now, technically, it happens in our organism. Your organisms, if they have the same requirement to live, and they live on the same habitat for that, kaya lang limited ang resource mo, katulad ng relasyon yung toxic, may intense pressure sa isa't isa, it instead of fostering increase in their population, what happens is that they could see a deterioration o pagkababa, decrease in the number of populations. So technically, these two populations that overlap sometime will, okay, sige, maghiwalay na tayo ng teritoryo. Akin ang kalahati ng teritoryo, sa iyo ang kalahati ng teritoryo. This happens to your organism. So what happens is that they now designate territories, no? Hindi ka na pwedeng lalampas sa linyang ito at dito rin siya. So, there could also be something like this. At kapag naghiwalay sila, no, they could have different environmental condition na may expose sila. So, ang nangyayari, character displacement could be or could happen. Kung saan pwedeng dahil naghiwalay yung dalawang parehong populasyon na nag-aaway for that, paghiwalay nila, na-expose na sila sa ibang mga resources. So, ang nangyayari ngayon dito is that some of their characters or genetic characteristics gets displaced or nawawala na siya sa kanyang katawan dahil nag-mutate na siya. A very good example in here, yung mga finches sa Galapagos Island ni Charles Darwin. So, according to, yung tinignan ni Charles Darwin, yung mga finches on the north, the south, the east, and the west side of the Galapagos Island, napansin niya, para-pareho namang finches or bird ito. They belong on the same genus. But, one thing that he observed is that the beak, no, yung beak ng mga finches have different phenotype. Kumbaga, yung isa, sobrang patulis, yung isa parang ganun sa mga parrot na may pababa, tapos yung iba parang ganun sa eagle na, pero they are the same finches. What he observed in here in the Galapagos Island is that the north side of the island have different sources or food resource compared to the south, no? Kumbaga napansin niya, one side of the island is more of the fruit-bearing trees. So, kung fruit yan, flesh yan, malambot yan, iba yung beak na gagamitin mo compared sa other side ng island kung saan hard-shelled yung mga seeds o yung mga fruits. So, technically, hindi pwede yung patunis na finch. So, kailangan mo yung parang ganun sa parrot na kayang i-crush yung mga shelled fruits na yan. The same manner in competition. Because of intense competition, minsan, because of the intense pressure that the population is facing daily, what they tried is that they displace themselves. Okay, maghiwalay na lang tayo, sa'yo ang north side, sa akin ang south side. And because of that, they could also get exposed to different environment. And because of that environment or differences in the environment, nagkakaroon ng stimulation, they adapt to that. And technically, even if they belong to the same population, what happens now is that they get, kumbaga, nasasana yung katawan nila on that environmental condition. So, nagbabago din physically and genetically yung kanilang makeup. I think I could explain you this better on speciation later on pagdating natin sa chapter 4. Okay? Okay. Based on taxonomical relationship, let's look at competition. So, taxonomical relationship to ha. So, we have different types of competition. We have one, the intraspecific competition. And of course, we have the interspecific competition. Intraspecific competition within one population. Same organisms fighting on a limited resource, as you can see here, na nagsusuntukang vulture. And then you have the interspecific competition wherein there are several populations fighting over a limited resource like lions versus cheetah over impala, I think, or gazelle. And then we have here your chimpanzee and baboon over a banana. So that's an interspecific competition. However, there's a lot, marami pang tungkol yan, no? Tingnan natin. So who competes? Competition for resources between members of different species, interspecific, pero kapag same species, specific. Okay. Interspecific competitions are usually you can see that, no, over food, over a limited territory, over actually minsan ang competition is more of sexual. Oh, and rated SPG. Yan. Then sometimes the competition is more of the who's the best meal, mga guys, sa breeding privileges siya, katulad nung nakikita nyo dito. So, in interspecific competition, same species compete over a limited resources. So, technically, kung overpopulated, parang ganito yung sinasabi natin sa carrying capacity, no? Yung carrying capacity ng bowl na yan, no, is not enough for everyone. So, that could cause, no, death of the population because of limited resource compared to this na medyo okay naman yung kanyang bowl, no? Perfect siya for everyone. We have interspecific competition kapag, no, this is an asymmetric competition. There's a substantial difference in the abilities. Kaya natin siya tinawag na asymmetric competition because this happens between two different species. And these two different species could have different strength or abilities compared to the other. For example, as you can see in here, the cheetah siguro to, I'm not sure kung cheetah yan or leopard, compared to the ability or skill naman ng lions, you know for a fact na mas kayang-kaya siya ng lion compare in terms of the food compared to the cheetah, no? So, as you can see also in here, between the chimpanzee and the baboon, baboons are very strong, or they're stronger compared to chimpanzees, but chimpanzees are more agile. When I say more agile, mas mabilis compared to your baboon. So, we have here asymmetric competition. There's a different balance. And if you are enthusiast ng mga National Geography, BBC, or Animal Planet, you know for a fact na pinapakita nila yung when hunting, no, ano yung mga hunting techniques na ginagawa na lang ng mga hyena to, or you can see na yung minsan leopards, no, even if they are the one who successfully hunted for a food, if there's a stronger predator aside from him, iniiwan niya yan. So you can see that, no, asymmetric competition. Okay. You can see that also. So the interaction often leads to the reduction in the population of the weaker species, whereas stronger species survive and continue to reproduce. You, actually interspecific competition, na kung breeding yan, if you are watching yung mga documentaries regarding prides of lions, no, you know for a fact na kapag natalo yung lion, kung sino yung nandun sa pride ngayon, kapag may bagong head lion, no, it kills all the cubs na nangganon yung anak nung previous lion na yon. Even those mga juvenile, pinapalayas niya or papatay niya. So in essence, it kills or it decreases the population. So may mga ganito tayong instances, no? For example, also interspecific competition like mga hippos natin versus your crocodiles, Amazon crocodiles, no, they share the same resources, which is the river, pero crocodiles, the crocs in Africa, still have lumalayo sila when hippos are there because they could still be killed even if they are the predators, no? Predator sa predator, no? Mas ano pa rin ang mga hippos. I think hippos are more of omnivores compared to your crocodiles. But then again, hindi nila agad-agad or hindi sila, even if they're on the river, they do not easily kill this strong hippos na yan. Hence, your interspecific competition or competition itself regulates the ecological communities and acts as an agent of natural selection. Of course, the weaker were the ones being eaten, no? They're the ones being reduced, and probably there are times that the weakest among the population contain the not so good gene of the population. So, nare-remove din siya. Not always, not always, but technically, yes. Now, based on influence, we also have different types. Nung kanina, taxonomical. Ngayon, based on influence. No? One, we have direct competition, as in direct, like fighting directly. Two, we have indirect competitions. What does this mean? When you say direct competition, an interaction wherein there's a direct influence of each other by affecting the availability of resources in the ecosystem. So, pwedeng yan, no? In between two predators on one prey, ganyan. Or even if, as you can see in here, we have the water buffaloes and that of the zebra on the limited resource of water here. So, there's a direct competition, as in head-on competing in here. Okay? Or, as you can see in here, sa mga octopuses natin, no, there's a direct influence also. There are one of the very few in marine environment that has a very good brain functionality, as in they do learn, they do know how to logically escape some problems, no? Ang galing nila mag-isip. You can watch that documentary. I highly suggest for you to look into that. Maganda yung mga inaaral nila dito. Indirect competition, of course, indirect ang mga species in here. For example, your flower, there are indirect competitors in here for the nectar, no? We have there your bees, you have there your hummingbirds, you have other, ano bang tawag mo dito? Wasp? Bumblebee ba to? No, mga wasp natin, no? We have here some bats and some of the reptiles that also feed on these flowers, no? Indirect competition yan. The species involved in indirect competition usually exist in different ecological niches, no? When they have different niches because, for example, katulad yung kanina, yung bee nectar lang, pero yung sa reptile, buong flower yung kanyang kinakain and something like that. No? Based on mechanism, we have also different type. Number one, you have your interference competition. You have there your excuse me, exploitative competition, and of course, the last, you have there your apparent competition. So, actually, itong based on mechanism is also based on influence. No, mapapansin mo na medyo mas ano lang natin siya, mas clarify or classify pa na. So, in interference competition, this is direct influence also, or direct competition also. But this is directly influence the process of foraging, reproduction of others, and prevent establishment of species in the environment. So, in interference competition, you can see really fighting, stealing, killing among species. Talagang sobrang sakitan yan, interference. Kumbaga, from the name itself, interfere, no? Nag-interfere sila sa kapwa nila or within or other population. As you can see in here, male lion versus male lion. You have there your bears between wolves. Ayan. So, interference talaga siya. Or even two apex predators, no? You have here your orca and that of the shark. Trivia lang, no? Orca loves to prey sharks, the great white sharks. They love to prey the livers. Yung actually ang kinakain lang nila talaga sa shark, as you can see here, no, tina-target na nga, is their liver. Liver lang. Tapos iiwan na nila yung buong carcass nung shark. Why? Because the liver of the sharks are actually probably siguro tasty sa kanila, because if you will be looking biochemically, the process of these sharks to withstand the salt environment and to prevent yung balance, the tonicity, yung hypertonic natin dyan, no? Yung tonicity nila. Kung sa animal fission nyo at siguro ito makikita or biochem, they have this mechanism on their liver, nakakaiba, wherein it is enabled to balance out the sodium potassium on the body of the shark. So, hindi siya nag-shrink kahit na wala siyang scales, no? Kahit na wala siyang ibang characteristics ng fishes, at saka gills, ang ano lang sa kanya, slits ng ano lang dito, di ba? Unlike for other fishes, etong sharks kasi natin, very ano yung kanilang liver. I'll leave the discussion to your animal physio or to your biochem teacher. But then again, for orcas o yung mga killer whales na tinatawag natin, they love to feed on these apex predators also. And of course, another example of interference is yung ating kugon versus our Oryza sativa or rice, no? Kugon have actually, they compete for the area sa farm area mo or any land actually. What kugon do or does is they secrete substances on the soil or on the reservoir, acidic substances that will make the soil or the reservoir having pH that is lower, no? Excuse me. Therefore, therefore, yung mga farmers nyo ngayon, isa sa kaaway talaga nila sa farm ang kugon. Kasi, once may kugon sa tabi, it naturally will release acidic substances on the soil, making the soil acidic, or the water in there acidic, which is not the conducive pH for Oryza sativa or your rice, because your Oryza sativa or rice, mas gusto nila neutral pH lang, water nga lang kasi talaga. Kaya lang ginagawa ng kugon para mas makuha niya yung area na yon, para patayin yung other species, may release siya ng acidic enzyme, and then pag namatay yung rice, sila naman ang mag-forage or talagang dadami doon sa area na yan. And that is why you have to kill or you have to remove kugon when you have a rice field, kasi mamamatay at mamamatay sa acidic pH yung rice ninyo. It is a form of interference competition. Hindi sila nag-aaway, bardagulan, no, in your terms. Hindi sila, they don't have the direct fighting, but then again, they fight using their enzymes, using their chemicals, no? Ibang way naman kung mag-fight ang mga, okay? Then we have the exploitative competition. Exploitative competition is better explained if you have in a forest, no, in a canopy. Yung meron tayong pinag-uusapan dito kung saan there is a limited resource, which is sunlight. And because of that, no, it's an indirect competition where species are connected by a common limiting resource that acts as an intermediate. So, supposedly, usually this is space, water, resources, or sunlight. So, if we can see in here, sa picture na to, it's a very good example of an exploitative competition. Why? Because on different levels in the forest, no, different levels dito sa atin, sa forest natin there. Canopy 1, Canopy 2, Canopy 3, and then you have your Canopy 4. So at different levels, no, these plants have different requirements also on sunlight. Technically, pag natanggal tong pinakamalaking tree natin, magta-thrive itong mga sub-canopies natin. Kaya lang, even if meron dyan, no, yung mga streaks of sunlight that could come in between the canopy of this tree stratum could actually enable them to make photosynthesis. At yung mga natitira pang slits dito sa mga baba. If given a chance that this entire tree could be cut down, etong mga subcanopies mo naman, they will foster and will be also increasing in their length. In ecology, you still have chances, no? Chances for survival. So another example also is of this worms na meron tayo here. No? Exploitative competition pa rin because technically yung mga nag-feed sa kanya, no? Ayan, may mga ants ka, may mga birds ka. So, what happens is that ang mga birds mo, mas nakikita nila yung dark in coloration. Ayan, compared dito sa mga light ones. Pero yung mga lighter ones, yung mga parang hindi ka pansin-pansin sa bird, ang nakakapag-exploit naman dyan ay yung mga other predators that are sensitive to the coloration. So, may yung mga natitira. Kung mapapansin nyo, no? Yung bird na to, more on the dark ones ang kanya nakikita. Pero yung mga lighter ones, smaller ones, yung mas maliliit na worm, yun naman na natitira sa mga smaller predators. Exploitative competition siya. Indirect competition. And of course, we have apparent competition. This is now indirect competition also, where both of the competing species are preyed upon by the same predator. And because they are preyed upon by the same predator, there is like a fluctuating or oscillating population sa kanila. For example, no, apparent competition is that hindi naman sila magpapapansin, kainin mo ko. It's not like that. It's not like that. That, for example, this capelin, no, ang kanyang tip for this one is the krills. So, kapag krills ang kinakain niya ng kinakain, the copepod biomass will now grow or tataas. But at the time that the krill population now gets lowered, syempre, lumiliit yan, and yung copepod population increases, this capelin will change its diet at ito naman ang kanyang kakainin, the copepods. If that happens, it gives time for the krill biomass or the krill population to increase. No? After that, wala na namang copepod or matitira na lang ay mga surviving copepods, and what was left, and then mapakikita niya doon sa krill na dati niyang kinainan, dumadami naman. So, capelin now will feed on the krill. Yung natirang nag-survive na copepods, magpo-flourish naman the next. If you can see in here, syempre kung sino yung naiwan na mga copepods, yun lang yung genetics or yun lang yung parang genes for the next season ng mas maraming populasyon ng copepods. And then kakainin na naman siya, no? Si-select, kakainin naman siya ng capelin, may matitira na naman. So, as you can see, mas nagbabago yung genetic makeup ng population. Kasi, kung sino yung mga natirang survivors, sila lang, yung genes lang nila, yun na ipapasok for the next generation. So, here, there's also an effect of competition to the natural selection of organisms. No, hindi naman, ito sila yung mga surviving. So, sila yung kung baka kung ano meron gene sa kanila, yun na yung may papass from generation to the next generation. Okay. Now, again, for competition, it's a struggle for survival, limiting resource, negatively affects the population growth rates. So, ano tong character displacement? Ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina. Paano? There is now what we call as allopatric zone, meron kang sympatric and allopatric ones in here. So, ito yung sasabi ko on the character displacement on Darwin's finches earlier. Kung papansinin mo, iba, these are both finches but they have different beaks or bill depth because they are now, no? They are now separated on the island because na-displace na yung kanilang population. Dati, sa isang lugar lang sila and they always fight. They always, instead of their energy focusing on reproduction, it's more focused on fighting against or survival against each other. So there will be time wherein this population will have their own territories or separate their ways, and because of that, they will be exposed to different environmental stimuli that could affect, that could lead them to adopt to that and change for in accordance with the natural habit that they are now focusing to. Exploitative competition. So, meron naman tayong interspecific, ang process, yung isa agonistic, yung isa ecological. So, pag interspecific interference naman, ito yung two population, they will fight directly, maglalaban sila in an agonistic agony, meaning magsasakitan. No? There's a fight in here. Kapag ecological naman, shifts in traits that affect resource overlap between sympatric species. So, for example, ito, this is a good example of agonistic. A hyena versus cheetah. Yan. At yung mga tinatawag natin sa interspecific exploitative, ito, bobcats and lynx, no? In areas where bobcats and lynx do not live together, they have similar sized teeth, catch similar sized prey, and in areas where the two species live together, lynx have much longer teeth and tend to capture larger prey than bobcats. So, kumbaga, if they do not live together, parang natural yung kanilang, natural lang yung kanilang phenotype, yung kanilang physical abilities. Pero, if they live together on one area, mapapansin mo that there is a difference on the body structure of one species. Kasi nga, they will now be competing and exploiting the same limited resource. So, may mga ganyan. Now, we're done with variation. Check. We're done with competition. We'll now be moving on to adaptation and selection. So, sa adaptation naman tayo. Adaptation, evolutionary adaptation, is the adjustment. Ito na yung pag-uusapan. Adjustment of organisms to their improvement in order to improve their chances of survival. Not improve their body structure, no? But improve their chances of survival. Again, yung misconception na nag-evolve tayo for the better is wrong, ha? So, an organism's adaptations are a result of the gene the organism inherits from its parents, no? Organisms adapt to the environment in three main ways, such as biological and physiological. So, let's look at that. So, in adaptation, meron tayong structural adaptation. This is a feature of an organism's body that helps it to survive or reproduce. So, pwedeng structural adaptation is an example on the body parts natin. Meron tayong short siguro lang, no? When you live in a colder environment, no, or like Baguio City or America kung mayaman ka, o sa ibang bansa na malamig, you have to look at for your hair, no? Tingnan mo yung hair mo sa kamay mo or sa body parts mo. Pansinin mo na parang when you're on the colder area for a longer period of time, mas mahaba yung hair projection sa katawan mo compared kapag nandito ka sa Sambal. Say for example, ako, I experienced this. When I was in Baguio, no, for years, ang puti-puti ko. Ang puti-puti ko talaga, tapos para akong mabalbon. But then again, after some time living here in Zambales, kung mapapansin nyo ngayon, parang wala na akong kabuhok-buhok because it's a structural adaptation of my body. Imagine mo naman kung ang balbon mo, tapos nandito ka sa initan, sobrang init. This is why most of the foreigners, pansinin niyo yung mga foreigners, no, ang haba ng buhok ng nasa katawan. Why? Because may time sa kanila of winter at kahit naman summer sa kanila, malamig pa rin. Structural adaptation. Now, another example in here is that bakit yung sa ilong natin, I think nasabi ko naman sa inyo to, no? be proud sa ilong mo. Because yung malaking butas at dapang ilong mo is actually an structural adaptation natin nandito sa mga equatorial o yung may init na lugar. Compared sa mga Caucasians na sobrang tangos at parang ang liit-liit ng botas ng kanilang ilong. Technically, as one of what I have read for the explanation in there, kaya ganun ang mga ilong ng mga Caucasians sobrang pointed at ang liit ng butas is because so that the cold air, no, yung cold air na papasok sa kanila is not that large, hindi marami, para hindi siya papasok dito sa yung sinus, which now, technically, didiretso dyan sa area na yan, and could cause for freezing in here. So, lalamig daw yung katawan mo. So, ito yun, no? Yung features ng ilong. Structural adaptation din siya. Then we have behavioral. So, responses made by an organism that help it to survive. And so we have several behavioral adaptations. Behavioral in the way of estivation, hibernation, behavior in reproduction, yung some of the organism dance, some of the organism sing, no, some of the organism fight for their love, mga ganyan, behavioral. And of course, we have the physiological. Bakit para to? Physiological naman is more on enzymes, chemical bodies, and whatnot. No? For example, you have here your giraffe. No? Physical adaptations, nandyan siya. May mga horns. Yung long tongue nila helps rip off leaves of trees, camouflage, and so on. Trivia lang, no? Of course, alam niyo kay Lamarck, inubanat ang leeg kaya humabang ano ng giraffe. Of course, that's not wrong. That's not wrong. That's wrong. Remember nung we have in here the short neck and the long neck giraffes. No? Syempre nawala sa because of environmental condition, food resource, nawala ang mga short neck, at ang natira na lang ay mga long neck na kayang mag-reach sa matataas na trees, no? Actually, two organism. I'm not sure kung maidadaan ko siya here, ha? But, your giraffes love to feed on acacia trees. Leaves ng acacia trees. And of course, dahil palaging kinakain ang acacia trees, dito pala. Dahil palagi silang kinakain ng mga giraffes, they adapted. No? Nag-adapt din itong ating plant. And they started now to produce trichomes or thorns. No? Yung thorns nila becomes bigger and bigger and bolder and pricklier, no? At sometimes. So, yung giraffes mo ngayon, yung mga previous noon, some did not, wasn't able to feed on this acacia kasi nga may mga prickly thorns na siya. So, what your giraffes did is also to adapt in relation to the adaptation of your acacia. So, what happens is that they have now tough lips, kalagang yung makapal nilang labi, pinatigas nila, hindi naman pinatigas, but over the years, siguro, kakakain niya dito kahit na gutom siya, lalo pa kaya nagkakalyo siguro yung labi niya, yung pagkakalyo, lagyan natin ng star ganun. But then again, because probably of the exposure to these thorns, yung labi nila now becomes like a rubber to the point that hindi na siya agad-agad natutusok sa prickly thorns ng acacia. And their lips actually and saliva also evolved to the point that it could crush, natutunaw niya yung kinakain niya, and yung kanyang tongue, niya, the same with their lips, they are like rubber type, na tipong kahit gumanon yung dilat, hilahin yung pinaka nandun sa may stem ng acacia, hindi na siya nasusugat. So, kung makapal like a rubber, parang rubber ng gulong na hindi siya agad-agad nasasaktan, no, when they are eating their favorite prickly acacia leaves or trees, no, ayan siya. So, may mga physical adaptation tayo. Kung titingnan dito sa here, structural, but there also has a behavioral and physiological. Physiological because of the saliva content that is enabled to dissolve prickly materials. No? They also have, ayan, dark tongue, saliva, it goes to the sharp. Ayan, meron tayong mga adaptation of your giraffe. You have the dark tongue in there kasi palagi nakalabas no sunburn, hindi joke lang. No, this dark tongue actually is like a rubber type and there have a saliva that coats this entire mouth so that it's not hindi siya hindi agad-agad mapiprick yung bibig nila. Their saliva is like para siyang it's like a pandikit like the Elmer's glue. Yun nilalaro nyo yung slime ball ba yun yung para siyang made of a glue-like materials that coats now on the thorns at the same time dissolves the enzyme in there directly dissolves this thorns part of your no? Ayan, yung ilong, yung kanyang favorite tongue, no? Structural, ayan. They have prehensile and tough tongue. Prehensile means na, ano yan? Unlike sa atin, hindi, genetically, hindi ko kayong, parang gawin mo siya dila mo, yung, gawin mong O, U, A, whatever. Pero here, they have prehensile, meaning they could project out and then retract, project out and retract. Prehensile, tough tongue, long necks, and brown patterned spots. No, behavioral, one of the behaviors din ng mga giraffe is that they gulp water quickly, 10 gallons at a time. Remember kasi, they have a very long neck. No? Kaya lang, may pros yan. Naabot niya yung mataas na food. Yes. Ang cons mo naman is drinking. Kasi, pag nag-drink ka, ang haba ng leeg mo, tapos gaganon mo siya, there's also a problem in here. Kasi pag bumaba yan, kaya mapapansin yung mga giraffe kapag umiinom, parang nag-squat sila sa kanilang legs for them to drink on the ground. And at the same time, but if they did that, they are subjecting themselves to a lot of predators. So, ang nangyari, they have to gulp a large amount of water at one time. So, 10 gallons agad ang iniinom naman yan sa isang ganunan lang niya. And structurally, there's something with the backflow. Meron silang part in their neck that prevents the backflow o yung sudden rush of blood pagbaba ng kanilang head, no? And sometimes they have also behaviors na they acquire water from dew o yung early in the morning and of course the food that they eat. They can go long periods without water because number one, it's really difficult for them to drink with having that neck and it causes a lot of disorientation pag inangat nila agad yan. So, they're also subjecting themselves to predators. So, they have these behaviors. No? And one thing is, behaviorally, yung natutuwa ako sa behavior na to, no? They could sleep with one eye closed. Parang pag nagbabantay lang ng anak mo or ng kapatid mo. Tulog yung isang mata mo, nakapikit yung isang mata mo, pero yung isa nakabukas, no? Sleep with one eye closed, partner looking out, and survive with only 30 minutes sleep. So, ang tanong ko sa inyo, ngayon sa college, are you a giraffe? You sleep for 30 minutes only? Ganyan. No? Joke lang naman. But in another behavior din pala ng mga giraffe is that when they're drinking water, they are also parang with partner. Kailangan kasamahan mo ko, parang ikaw lang. It's just like you when you go to the CR, you need someone to be your partner to look out. No? Something like that. And physiologically in their body, they have heart walls 3 inches thick. Bakit 3 inches? This is because it should be able to pump that blood to that a very long neck at the same time, kaya niya yung pag nag-bend ang kanyang head, there's no backbone. Ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, backflow, I mean. So, heart was 3 inches thick, 24 inches, and weighs around 11 kilograms. Imagine a heart that is 11 kilograms. Ilang manok na yun? 11 chickens? No? That's a very large heart that's able to support 280 by 180 blood pressure. No? This is to support yung blood flow to the brain. So it has to have a large heart that could pump, no, so that it from that long neck, the blood will go to the brain of this animal. And then they have one-way valves in jugular veins to prevent backflow when heads are bent. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina on their behavioral. So if you can see in here, it's a very simple animal, but in terms of adaptations, they have a lot. Structural, behavioral, physiologically, they have different types of adaptations that could enable them to at least survive in their environment. No? So as you can see in here, you have a large heart that could pump the blood to the brain, but they have also jugular veins here, jugular veins that could prevent the backflow of the blood when they bend. Na plant adaptations, marami ito, no, waxy covering, spines for the leaves, long roots, roots near surface, and so on. Remember my discussion on the their spines, no? Sabi ko nga, it's not for to protect them from herbivores, but the spines actually, they trap, no, air. The spines reduces airflow around the cactus and trap air around the body of the cactus in between the spine so that this area will be colder compared to the outside. Remember again yung ating ito ang tama nito, flow, no, yung ating sa from high to low na concentration gradient natin, no? Yung what happens is that if this is the spine area and this is the body of the cactus, and then may mga spines ka dyan to the point na merong in between air, there's an in between air in here. Etong nasa gitnang ito, between the flesh of the cactus and that of the spine in here, becomes now a buffer zone that is slightly moist, so that in an intense sunlight or during noon where there's very intense sunlight, the water content of the cactus will not slip off out of its body because there's a buffer zone created by that of the thorns. So as you can see in here, there's a ridge here, and then there's some of the spines of this baby cactus. But if this grows, no, it could have a thicker thorns. In between that, there is now a buffer zone, a colder air that is not very intense as the outside and would keep the cool within the body of the cactus for moisture to be locked in on the body of the cactus. So yun yung trabaho ng spine. That's the job of the spines of the cactus. It's not to protect them from predators, but rather to trap in moist. So they collect water also, these thorns. In foggy areas, cactus spines collect dew and drop onto the dirt and be absorbed by the roots. So mas hindi siya tatalsik na ganyan. And then even the dews on the early morning or cold nights, bababa siya ngayon sa roots ng yung cactus. So it helps also in the collection of more water. They provide shade for the entire cactus body, and so on. So another one for adaptation of organisms is mimicry. No? Mimicry is the physical resemblance of two or more species no? Resulting into an inherent advantages of similar appearance. So you have the imitative species, you call that as mimic. Then you have there your model. I think you have been talking about this on your ecology class. So I think dadaanan ko na lang siya, no? So we have actually 5 na siya, types or fundamental types of mimicry. You have the Batesian mimicry, aggressive mimicry, and the Mullen mimicry. Batesian mimicry or your Peckhamian. And then we have other types of mimicry. I'll let your other professor deal with it. No? So the operation of mimicry system depends on both learned and innate responses. Learned because you have been exposed to that operation or to that system, and then it hurts you, or there's an impact on it, and then the next time that you see that, you tend to go away from it if the experience is painful. But if the experience is pleasant, of course, babalik-balikan mo siya, no? To the point that it becomes now your innate response to the other species. So, learn, no? The young bird learned to avoid striking orange and black pattern monarch butterfly because it's distasteful. So, hindi siya masarap. So, meron siyang not so good experience. So, the next time na may nakita siyang ganitong itsurang organism, it will not feed on it anymore, no? This is on the aposematic coloration. And innate is yung avoidance. Innate sa'yo. Nakapag may nakita kang gumagalaw na ahas dyan, most people, no, hindi naman lahat, no, iba kasi hindi takot, but most people, they are innately will avoid snake, whether that snake is constrictor or lalong na kung mukha siyang mga king cobras or milk snakes, no? Yeah. So, how does Batesian mimicry happens, or how does Batesian mimicry now helps in adaptation? Some of your organisms, no, tend to mimic or copy those organisms that have advantageous characteristics. So again, for Batesian mimicry, for the mimicry, this is some of your organisms will get successful in their survival if they will mimic or model those who have advantages, no? So, tingnan natin yung, let's look at Batesian mimicry. Here in the Batesian mimicry, a benign species will resemble a noxious or dangerous one. When you say benign species, these are species that don't have any venom or abilities or advantageous abilities, no? Compared to those noxious or dangerous ones. So, what they will do is imitate or mimic the body structure or body capability, the body coloration, body physical manifestations of those toxic and dangerous ones. So example in here is on the picture. So we have here colobrid snake. See colobrid snake here, they resemble the poisonous coral snake. So if you can hear, the next picture, the other one is a coral snake and the other one is a colobrid snake. So in essence, on the first glance, they will look like the same, no? In animals that have a dangerous experience with milk snakes, no? Yung banding, yung pag-iba-iba ng bands ng colors niya. Of course, when you see them again, the next time, iiwasan mo na siya. The same with the colobrid. Now, Mullerian mimicry, this is naman several noxious species come to resemble each other. So, the advantage to each member of the group is that the avoidance response that other species may develop and will be reinforced when many of the species will share the same aposematic coloration or at least body coloration. So, great example in here is your hooded pituwi. Your hooded pituwi actually are somewhat, hindi sila, they are not being hunted by hunters because their flesh has a nauseous deadly to numbing effect when eaten. So some of the hooded pituhi now, no, the skin feathers of this have been contained homobatractocin, which is a toxic alkaloid compound. If there's an alkaloid compound that we're talking about, alkaloids are anti or antinosusception components. Anti-susception, meaning they cause you to have a numb or paralysis, no, nagnanumb, or there's a numbing feeling, analgesic, kumbaga para siyang anesthesia, parang ganan. So they have that homobatractocin chemical. So it can also cause, when eaten, yung parang nagkakaroon convulsions, yung parang nanginginig-nginig effect ka, no? So some of this hooded pituwi, no, ang nangyari sa kanila is that, for example, we have here your Dichorus, Kerchocephalus, Ferruginous, no? They resemble Dichorus, no? They also contain the toxin homobatractocin, kaya lang, compared to the Dichorus, little or maliit lang yung amount ng homobatractocin na meron sila. But if you can see in here, no, most iba-ibang species yan, iba-ibang hooded pituwi yan, no? We have the Kerchocephalus, and then we have the Ferruginous, meaning Ferruginous, kulay tanso, ferroxide, mukha siyang tanso, ito, katulad nitong brown na to. We have the Dichorus, itong famous na itong dalawa, no? There, yan. No? Meron tayong, I think this is Dichorus also in here. So, makikita mo na magkakamukha talaga itong mga pituhin natin. So, as you can see in here, we have top left here, hooded pituhi, this is Dichorus. Here, ito yung pinaka-toxic sa kanila. Pero yung bottom left in here, we have here your Kerchocephalus. Kerchocephalus because meron siyang something, may kirk, ano, meron siyang palong at the cephalic end. Usually naman, when you do have in systematics, when you do identification of your organisms, ayan, more on the characteristics that they have. So this is your hooded pituwi, the pituwi Kerchocephalus because of that. But if you look at the body, almost the same yung aposematic coloration nila. And this is what you call as Mullerian mimicry. They have almost the same physical manifestation as one group, no? And then you have here the top right, you have the crested pituwi, nito, si Cristatus in here, no? Middle right, we have here the rusty one. This is your Ferruginous. Ferruginous because kulay tanso siya. Okay, si Kerchocephalus at itong si Cristatus, they look the same in the, because of that palong in here on top, the top portion of the feather. Ferruginous, they have the same body structure as that of the Dichorus, pero more on ferric coloration or rusty in coloration siya. And then we have the blue cap Ephrita, blue cap because meron siyang blue something here. And then we have here your other one. This one here and this one, no? They are not anymore very as adamant as the Kerchocephalus and that of the, but these are mimics of these things. Now they try to copy the coloration, they copied the behavior so that it will be more ang tawag mo dito, advantageous for them. Mullerian mimicry. Now, if hunters or some of the predators will see these birds, they will not feed on them directly because they have already experienced or they have that instinct that because this Dichorus is very toxic and will cause them paralysis to death, they will not feed on anything that looks familiar to it. And that is how Mullerian mimicry now is successful. That is why some of the birds, like this too, try to mimic or copy the physical characteristics of these birds. So in adaptation, they try to look at that advantages. Okay. Then we have aggressive mimicry. Aggressive mimicry is a direct contrast of your repetition mimicry. Aggressive mimicry, or what you call as your Peckhamian mimicry. Here, a noxious or dangerous species now will copy a benign one. For example, we have here, I think this is a black hawk here. And this black hawk, no, imitates the characteristics of a vulture. As you can see, sa body pa lang niya, when it spread its wings, hindi siya katulad nung hawk na parang as in straight like that, gliding around. But what they do is that they copy the flying mechanism of vultures, which is medyo pa V, no? Medyo pa V yung kanyang flying. So that an unsuspecting prey will see, oh, those are vultures, no? And actually, ang mga Black Hawk, if I'm not mistaken, this is Black Hawk or the American Black Eagle, no? Search na lang siya. But what they do is that kapag tiningnan niya ng mga prey, oh, that's a vulture. And you know for a fact, kapag vulture yan, they feed on dead matter. And because they feed on dead matter or dead animals, a prey will not be hesitant to go out of its hiding place because, oh, that's only a vulture. I'm still alive. I will not be fed upon. And this is what this bird is now trying to take advantage of. So here, a dangerous organism will copy or mimic not dangerous organism. So here, a predator mimics a prey, or a predator now mimics a non-predatory organism. So also known as Peckhamian. Okay, ito pala siya, sorry. Zone-tailed hawk. So it's correct. It's a black hawk or a hawk. Okay. So the next that we have here is, of course, selection. Medyo marami din ang selection na pag-uusapan. Selection, environmental pressures lead to differential reproduction within a population, hence results in selection traits. Selection is a process where organisms are subjected against with causing change in the allele frequency or gene pool if they are able to survive and reproduce. Now, the surviving traits will now be the one being prevalent in the future successive generations or successive species. So let's look at selection. No. Okay, in selection, we're looking here about evolutionary fitness. Selection acts at the level of the individual and selects for individuals with greater contributions to the gene pool, and we have what you call as relative fitness. Contribution of an individual makes to the gene pool of the next generation relative to the contribution of other individuals. So let's look at this one. Now, we have here, there's a variation in the species. No? You have here the brown and the golden lion. There's competition on limited resource. Mag-aaway yan. The lions that blend in better catch the prey easier. Why? Golden yung ating environment. Golden ito. So, mas madali siyang mag-hide compared to the brown one. So, technically, in selection process, this is more fit. Fit ito. Kaya lang, fit yan. Actually, fit silang pareho. Evolutionary fit silang pareho dahil pareho naman sila ng capability. But the relative fitness, relative to the environment, compared to this, mas fit naman itong si golden lion. This is what you call as your evolutionary fitness and relative fitness. Pareho have the same capability, kaya nilang lumaban, they could fight on each other, evolutionary fitness, kaya lang when it comes to relative fitness, mas lamang si golden boy kaysa kay brown boy, no? Because they could hide on the environment to get for its prey. And because of this, for how many years later on, in terms of selection, these golden colored lions are more selected to the point that the frequency of allele on the gene pool of the lions for brown lions are now diminishing. until such time that there is now the adaptation. No, there's now the adaptation of the golden colored lions. So the light colored lions are now the fittest in the environment. If the environment we're talking about are here, yung golden yung environment. No, yung coloration of the dried grasses are more on the golden side rather than the brown side, to the point that the frequency of the allele of the brown lions from the start 100 years ago is very high, and now it is not anymore on the gene pool. So selection now will drive this one. So the most fitting only. So we have different types of selection. No? We have stabilizing selection. Types of selection naturally occurring. Naturally occurring. So we have here the stabilizing selection. We have the directional selection. We have the diversifying selection. And of course, we have the frequency dependent selection. Okay? So we'll be discussing this selection mechanisms or ways. Okay, so okay, I forgot one last. We have the sexual selection. So how does the trait change? So we have here the stabilizing selection, this directional selection, and disruptive selection. For you to have more understanding in here, for example here, selection against one extreme, directional. Ibig sabihin here, when you say directional selection, it is for one extreme trait and against the other extreme trait. So here, mas favorable, for example, yung medium to long na trait compared to your short. So since it is the most favorable one, there's a tendency that this short trait could be lost in the population. When you say stabilizing selection naman, it is more on the moderate traits compared to that of the both of extremes. So, hindi favorable ang mga short and long, so mas favorable ang medium. So, for example, in here, in the directional selection, long wiggly tails look like a snake, so, and scare predators. The longer the tail, the more it looks like a snake, the more, for example, for this lizard, the more that predators will tend to go away from it. So, yung mga shorter ang tails, ang tendency ngayon dyan, sila yung mas i-feed ng mga predators kasi nga, hindi naman mukhang nakakatakot. It's not, the tails, the short tails that they have does not look like a snake that could deter some of the predators. So, the longer the tail, the better. This is directional selection. When it comes to your stabilizing selection, the traits on the middle, in between, is the favored one. For example, okay, short tails mess up the cat's balance. Long tails drag on the ground when they jump. So, medium tails are best for cats, no, especially when they are jumping from high to low. Physics will tell you that even if the cat is sleeping, no, try to push a cat even on their sleeping. They still will land on their 4 feet. Even if that's a very high tree, they will land on their 4 feet. What causes this for them to land on their 4 feet is the tail that they have. Okay, so here the medium length of the tail of the cat enables them to balance when they're jumping or when they are landing, stabilizing selection. And then we have a disruptive selection. Disruptive selection, it goes against the mean or the middle one. They favor mostly on the both extremes. So, short tails versus long tails are more favorable than having that of the middle or yung in between the two, especially for squirrels, no, and skunks. Let's look at directional selection as more of an example. Here, a mode of selection in which a single phenotype is favored. A single extreme phenotype is favored. So hence, the allele frequency continues to shift on one direction only, the extreme one. That is why it is called the directional selection. For example, is more on the giraffe. Remember what we have talked about on the Lamarck's theory on why we have longer leg and longer neck giraffe. No? Another one is yung example natin kanina. Another example before. No? Then we have the disruptive or the diversifying selection. This is extreme values of the trait are favored over intermediate ones. So average or intermediate phenotypes are often less fit than the other either extreme phenotype. So for example, in here, for shell, predators could easily see pink shell, but not the gray ones or the brown ones because it can camouflage on the sand type or the substrate compared to this pink one. So here, before, there's a very high one, but then again, since most of the predators will see pink easily on a substrate or on the soil, the gray ones or the white ones, green ones, and the brown ones could easily hide under the sediment. So here, the disruptive or diversifying selection is most favored. And then we have stabilizing selection here. The stabilizing is more of on the middle, no, on the middle of the trait, and does not favor those on the extremes. Okay. So predators cannot catch the medium-sized lizards because they are the fastest, no, compared to the small and the largest one. Of course, kapag small ka, you have shorter legs, no, hindi ka makatakbo. You cannot run or outrun a predator. Unlike also with a very large one, your body, the weight of your body will be dragged, or the length of your body could be a disadvantage to you compared to the middle-sized one. The same manner on cats, no? And then the last on the selection, or the fourth on the selection, is what we call as the frequency-dependent selection. Here, the talk is quite on the number, the frequency of the population or organism. Okay, the term given to an evolutionary process where the fitness of a population or a phenotype, a certain phenotype, is dependent on its frequency relative to other phenotypes in a given population. So for example, we have a population of lizard. I'll give you an example in here on this lizard later on. Okay, it favors phenotypes that are either common, which is when it's the common one, so for positive frequency dependent, or rare, the negative frequency dependent. Let's talk about here. For positive frequency dependent selection, here it selects for common phenotypes in the population, and because they select the common, the usual phenotype, it decreases the genetic variance. So an example is the mimicry of the warning coloration of the dangerous species. So by other species that are harmless, which is known as the Batesian. So as you can see in here, we have your coral. Hindi pala siya milk snake. Milkshake pala yung naisip ko kanina. I'm so sorry. It's a coral snake. Oh my God. I'm hungry. I'm so sorry. Please correct the previous statement. Coral snake. So here, positive frequency dependent selection siya because of the mimicry in here compared to the scarlet king snake on the other side. And this poisonous eastern coral snake. Because this Batesian or this mimics continuously copy the noxious one, it becomes now common. So since it's become now common to them, it's a positive frequency dependent on them because it's a positive on the mimic, but it has a negative effect on those that are really noxious or dangerous one. Okay? Now, let's look at the negative frequency dependent selection. Here, it selects rare phenotypes. I'm so rare, sabi nga ni Selena Gomez, in a population. And this one, because the rare ones are being favored upon, it will now increase the genetic variance. So an example of this type of selection is on the unique group of the lizards in the Pacific west. We have the what we call as the side blotched. Side blotched because of the coloration on the sides of the lizards, which have a different three-color throat color patterns. You have the orange, blue, and the yellow. So side blotched. No? When you say side blotched, meron siyang mga blotching on the sides. No? Yung mga blotches yan. But we are looking at on the throat coloration here. Okay, let's look at in here. Okay, we have here the orange blotch, the rock one. Here. Rock, paper, scissors. It's a game kasi na rock, paper, scissors. Anong paper? Ganun siya. So, let's look at in here. Hindi ko siya gagawing laro. But, the orange one, and the blue, and the yellow one. So, orange will usurp or get territories from the blue meat guarders. Cooperatively, exclude yellow sneakers. Yellow sneakers, itong mga yellow throat natin na mga lizards in the Pacific are maliliit lang sila, and they usually sneak. Sila yung mga habang nasa reproductive stage, sila yung mga, ano yung tawag dito? Nag-aaway si orange at si blue, nang lalaban-laban sila, direct competition over the female. Tapos si yellow, siya yung sumisingit na, nakakasingit dahil busy mag-away yung dalawa, siya yung nakakasingit doon sa babae. So may mga ganyan tayo. Mga ano bang tawag mo dun sa relasyon? No, nag-aaway yung dalawang maniligaw pero ang sinagot yung hindi yung nandun sa gilid. Ayan. So, like a game of rock, paper, scissors, orange beats blue, blue beats yellow, and yellow beats orange in a competition for females. The same manner on the frequency-dependent competition. So, the big, strong orange males can fight off the blue males. To mate with the blue's pair-bonded females. The blue males are successful at guarding their mates against the yellow sneaker males. And the yellow males can sneak copulations, mga tirador, mga sumisingit habang during the copulation naman on the orange one. So here, as a result of a side-blotched lizard cycle in the distribution of these phenotypes, in one generation, orange might be the predominant. And then, dahil nakakasingit nga si yellow males, then si yellow male naman ngayon begins to rise in frequency because si orange lizards or orange throat lizards, they're the biggest one. And if there is a blue or other orange male that will sneak or try to mate with their female counterparts, makikipaglaban sila. So, maigo kasi to si orange. Dahil malakas ako, makikipag-away ako. To the point that they're more focused on fighting with each other, that the small yellow one now can sneak copulation with their females. So, the next time, dahil away ng away, direct competition, si orange sa orange, isa't isa, nakakasneak ngayon, nagkakaroon siya ng naiitlogan siya ng mga yellow lizards now. So, bukod sa their number decreases because of direct fighting, the yellow throats lizards now population will now increase dahil nga they are the ones who are copulating with the females. Now, after some time, once yellow males make up the majority of the population, blue males now, since puro yellow, masasawa naman si female, blue males now will be selected by the females because they're larger than the yellow males and there are more grandiose in the eyes of the coloration compared to the orange and the yellow, which is almost the same in coloration. So finally now, blue males become dominant in the cycle. So bababa ang orange, bababa naman ngayon ang frequency ng yellow, tumataas naman ngayon yung blue. But then again, between the blue and the orange males are more strong or stronger, therefore they could deter this blue male. So may mga iba't iba silang strategy. Si orange more on the brute, si blue males more on guarding their mate, no? And then si yellow, ito yung mga sneaky, mga dumudulas sa loob. So there is now a cycle of the frequency. So here, because of this cycles of frequency, the genetic variation now keeps on increasing for this lizard type. So this is how frequency-dependent selection happens. So they are more of the rare, kasi mas normal na yun. So mas pinifavor ngayon ni female yung hindi common, the different one. And then we have sexual selection. In the sexual selection, the selection pressure on males and females to obtain mates. So here, mate naman siya. It can result in traits designed to maximize sexual success. So sexual selection often results in the development of secondary sexual characteristics. It's not usually the reproductive characteristics, no, but there are some of the like aposematic coloration or like the courting or courtship mechanisms. It happens on sexual selection. Here, sometimes, no, some of the reproductive success like coloration is actually a handicap naman on the survival of the trait. Of course, the more color you are, the more you are very vibrant to the eyes of the female, you are also very vibrant to the eyes of the predator. So it becomes now a handicap on the population. So it could affect the survival of the population themselves. Kasi the more coloration you have, and the more it is the one favored by the female, well, of course, your progeny will be also as colored or more colorful than you, then they are very vibrant to the eyes of the predators. No? So it could be also a handicap to the population. Kahit naman, even though it's more of, it's not on aposematic coloration, but more of fighting, direct fighting of males, it can also be a handicap because they could be successful in the fight, but they could be injured also. Or the other one dies and the other is very injured to the point that it could not successfully mate with a female. So it's a handicap also for your organism. So we have two types. We have intrasexual selection and we have the intersexual selection. It's not, okay, it's not, oh, yung ibang pipiliin ko sa inter. No, no, that's not the case. So let's look at in here. When you say intrasexual, no, intrasexual selection, it's competition between members of the same sex, usually male, to access for mates. When you say intersexual selection, this is where members of one sex, usually females, choose the opposite sex. So dito sa intersexual, there's a female choice. But on the intrasexual, whoever wins on the fight will have access on the mates, like the lions and the lioness, no? So intersexual, like so most of your fishes, like your peahens and peacocks, no? Peacocks for male, pea-bird, and peahen for female, pea-bird. Oh, ayan tayo, no? So sex between members of the same sex ang away. Here, between two sexes because there's favoritism that will happen. Selection on the intrasexual, it's more of the fight, but it's on the intersexual, it's more of the grooming, the patterns, the coloration of the male that will be being favored by the female. Okay? So intrasexual selection, this is commonly fight to the death for a female. So male to male competition. Ma'am, meron bang female to female? Actually, meron din. Meron din female to female fight, no? For access of male's approval. Pero mas marami yung male versus male. So here, which members of the less limited sex compete aggressively among themselves to access to the limiting sex. Kasi kukunti lang yung babae, parang gano'n. The limiting sex is the sex which has the higher parental investment. So, ang nangyari kasi dito, since kakaunti ang babae, kakaunti ang population, so they favored the ones who are strong and could be able to protect the entire herd or the entire pride or the entire group, no? Lalo na kung if the grouping of the animals is more of patriarchal or lalaki ang favored compared to a matriarchal type like that of the elephant. And then we have the intersexual selection. This is where most of the patterns and very dramatic coloration, very dramatic feathers like that on your peacock and peahen. So it's also known as the mate choice or the female choice. Ladies' choice. On mayonnaise, ladies' choice. No? It's on the ladies' choice in which males compete with each other. Okay, I'm so sorry earlier. I was cut because there's no more template at the end. But then again, that will end our discussion. So for natural selection to occur and for the natural selection to be a process or a mechanism that drives evolution or evolutionary change, you have to look into this for conditions. So there should be variation, adaptation, competition, and of course selection. As you can see, there's a broad topic. There's a lot of things that could influence natural selection. Natural selection in meaning who is fit for the area that is naturally to occur. So it is something to do with the mutations and the variations on the genetics that has been passed to the offspring, competition because of limited resource, competition on food, space, and things like that. And the things that the organisms do in order to survive and compete with others could technically affect the population number and could also affect the genes on the gene pool. There's also we have also talked about the selection process, and we also talk about the other things that you have to comply, adaptation, okay, adaptation, which is very broad topic because all organisms have different adaptive capabilities, develop different adaptive techniques to the different environmental stimulus. But all in all, okay, with that of the migration, genetic drift, and gene flow, as well as natural selection, these are some of the things that could drive evolution of the entire organisms or the entire population of organisms. So I hope you learned something again with our new topic on the natural selection as part of the mechanisms and procedures or things that could cause evolutionary change. And I hope you learned something. Take down notes. And the next meeting that we have, I will be entertaining all your queries and questions. So happy learning, everyone. Thank you. I'm your Mama V for your evolution